What's up guys, Ben here bringing you another video today. This is the third installment in our six-part series, mid-season team reviews. Last video, we talked about the bottom of the standings after talking about the top of the standings in our first video. So we're gonna go back to the front end of things. And this one's kind of interesting. We're gonna have two teams heading, I think, in kind of opposite directions right now. A team that a lot of people thought might be playing kind of poor and be in the wilderness isn't playing much better. And the other team that people thought might be good all season is now in the wilderness. So let's talk about OpTic in New York. We're going to start first with Texas and do the usual spiel. Let's talk about how they're playing. They achieved their goals and what they need to work on going into champs if they want to go ahead and lift the trophy at the end of the season. All right, so here is the point standing so far this season. OpTic and New York sitting in third and fourth. And I think on the points totals that they have, they should be pretty solid for champs. I would say OpTic probably on pace to probably get a top 4 or 5 seed. I think the pressure would probably come from like a Thieves or a Boston getting a few more points. New York, and we'll get to them second in this video, you know, they continue to slide. They can be a bottom seed for champs. I don't think they're in danger of not making it, but they're sitting in a fourth spot right now, but I don't think that's very settled. So let's start with OpTic and talk a little bit about their season so far. All right, so it's been a little bit of a wild season for OpTic after top 4 placing in champs last year. You know, started so promising that year, winning Major 1, and then Illy's hand injury, and then they kind of were sort of mediocre after that. They decided to run it back with their team, which really did not work out. They didn't make it to the weekend at Major 1. They decided to really shuffle things up. Scump retired. Rambo was no longer the coach. Dashy was in the team and then out of the team and then in the team. And they didn't really have a great Major 2 either. I think top 4 is kind of disappointing for them. So they make further changes going to the Major 3 qualifiers, which they hosted at home at Esports Stadium Arlington. They bring in Dan Ghosty from Decimate Gaming. So bringing in a Challengers player for the first time, I mean, I can really remember recent memory with OpTic, and they ended up getting top 2 at Major 3. And I thought, you know, were a really good showing from them. There were some weaknesses, and we'll get to them in a second. I think we're laid bare in the Toronto series. But this is an OpTic team that's got a very sort of interesting style. It's very flashy, and I think it's very much based on the forms of their sub players. Like if Hook and SHOTZZY are on form, they look unbeatable in hardpoint. They get that emotion and that energy behind them. You can hear it in the comms. They kind of ride that wave. When their sub players aren't making that impact, when the sub players are making mistakes, I don't think the system really works because they're not as consistent as some other squads. But I do think that as far as goals go for this team, yeah, they haven't won an event so far this year, and I think that was probably one of their goals. They haven't hit that yet, but I think short term, with a lot of the instability around this team, I think they finally have found a lineup before that works for now. Again, I will put an asterisk on it. I'm still a little bit kind of iffy on Hook on this team. I know he played really good at Major 3, but we've seen sort of what happens on the other side with Kyler, and I think that will happen at some point this year, and how they deal with it will determine, I think, if he makes it to the end of the season. And if he doesn't, they've got some interesting decisions to make at that point, but at least for now, I think they've got a pretty stable lineup, so let's talk about their performance. All right, so map records are kind of interesting, and we need to kind of dive in further so I can explain some of this because it's a little bit iffy. And by the way, this is another one of those teams like we talked about last video with Florida, where they've gone through a number of roster changes, so we need to contextualize things sort of almost between different versions of the rosters they have. The 28-20 record is very good in hardpoint, and if we scroll all the way over here, bam, 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 you'll see that they were 7-9 in the game mode in stage 2, but look at their record in stage 3, and I think a lot of this is driven off the run they had at the event where they were just really hot in hardpoint. They went 9-4 at the Major in the game mode, and you can see that like they just have some maps like Fortress and Mercado that they're just unbeatable on. Hotel and HYDRA splitting teams with split maps with quality teams, and they won one embassy and lost a couple. I think that's probably their weakest hardpoint map right now. So I think they have 4 really good hardpoint maps. They're just really kind of hard to play in this game mode because they're going to get either Fortress or Mercado in pretty much every set that they play. Well, they're pretty much guaranteed to get it in every set they play if they pick one of them. I think though for this team, as good as I think their hardpoint form has been, I think a lot of that again is off the backs of players like Hook and SHOTZZY that have found form in this game mode at the right time. I think, you know, decision making and just sort of the team system has really helped. I think Dan Ghosty coming in and being sort of that gap filler, I guess kind of IGL, sort of main kind of anchor in the comms. I think pace setter is a word or a phrase I like to use. Is really kind of help bring out the best of their sub players in that game mode. That being said, I think the other 2 game modes are definitely a work in progress for this team. You see that control record, 5-8 in stage 3, and it really hasn't been any better in the other stages, 4-5 in stage 2, 2-5 in stage 1. So we scroll up here overall this season, they're 11-18 in the game mode. And just to contextualize where that ranks amongst other teams in the league, they're third lowest in control, which I think is a little bit shocking for this team. I would think that on paper, the season, and even at the end of last year, they should be a better control team than the last kind of 12 to 10 months have been for this team since Major 1, since that Tuscan control streak. But they've been really poor in this game mode. I think going into sort of the stretch run of the season, going into the last 2 events, you need to figure out how to improve in this game mode, because I think it's going to make them pretty difficult to beat. Now, I do want to tip that on the final day of the event, I believe they went 3-1 in control, so they seem to have turned a little bit of a corner. But outside of that one day of form, they were 2-7 in the game mode. So this is a team, if I'm OpTic, and you look at sort of the ways that I've lost controls this season, on paper, I think they're not that bad at Hotel. 50-50 is pretty solid. CeeLo is definitely a map they need to improve and play. It's going to end up in a set with a lot of really good teams. This team should be good at a CeeLo. They've got sub players that are really good at making dead silence plays. They have ARs that are very shifty. Like, if they can just improve their team decision making, they should on paper be solid on this map. The 1-5 on Fortress is sort of interesting. It's a map that's ended up because they picked it a bunch. Other teams have picked it up a bunch against them, and they've lost it pretty much every time I've watched it. The same, which is they just don't get offense round 5. They just don't get defense round 5, rather, and then you just lose the map. And they're not winning really offense to begin with on that map. We can actually take a look, if we want to, at their offensive win record on Fortress. I assume it's super low. Yeah, 17%. So not good. I mean, I think the overall win percentage on offense on that is really low to begin with, but 17's not great if they want to be solid at that map. So they're a team that I think can benefit from Expo control coming in. It's a new map they can master with their new squad. And again, it would help them not play a CeeLo if they wanted to and just kind of focus on Expo and Hotel. So something interesting to think about. I think for OpTic, when it comes to search, they've been fine. I think they do want to try and push themselves up the search rankings. One area of opportunity that kind of stands out to me so far this season is sort of their decision making when it comes to getting the bomb planted and winning those rounds. 57%, I guess 58% if you want to round up, is pretty low compared to other teams in the league. I think that would make them looking at this like third lowest in the league in plant win percentage, and they've got some really good quality search players on their team. So I think they need to improve on that spot. Really, like if you want to think about it, the Hotel S&D, I think where they were up 4-1 and lost to Toronto in Game 5 in Grand Finals, was kind of the backbreaker in that series. And so I think kind of improving their decision-making in search, and probably starts with the offense bomb down situation, will probably once again help them out. And they've actually been, surprising when it comes to search, and I want to tip it. If we scroll all the way over here and we take a look at their wins by maps in the series, their Game 5 record is really good this season. 8-2 is excellent and would put them near the top of the standings in regards to the game mode. So they're getting icy at the end of series, and that's been consistent across all the different teams they've had. But if they can improve their S&D decision making, again, with how good they are in hardpoint, it's going to be really hard to beat these guys in any series. So I think those are the areas of opportunity for OpTic. I want to talk a little bit about, just to kind of wrap things up, about kind of individually where some of the players are. Let's talk let's actually start first and talk about SHOTZZY. So if we take a look at just stats prior to this major cycle, Ant's numbers aren't bad. They're just not what we expect from him. 0.95 in search. 42 plus first blood's actually really good though. 0.97 in hard point. Not too bad compared to sub players, and a 104 in control. It's not the MVP numbers that we expect from SHOTZZY. But look at the improvement when we look at just stage 3 and major 3. And I think this speaks to the impact that maybe Dan and sort of the internal mindset on the team has kind of had on these players. SHOTZZY now averaging a 1.14 in hardpoint across 20 maps. So not a small sample size when it comes to the game mode. 104 in search, 30 first bloods, a little bit less than last time, but other players on the team have stepped up on the first bloods. And a 103 in control is also good as well. So Ant really stepped it up across all facets of his game in terms of individual performance. And I think that for Ant, this kind of puts him back into the all-star conversation. Now, I don't know if he's going to be able to rank above players like Pred and HYDRA and aBeZy. I think it's going to come down to how those teams play individually, or rather how those teams play as a unit over the course of the next 2 events. But I think Ant has gone from being sort of outside the top 5 sub conversation to being in it now. It's just a question of how does he play down the stretch here to really be a potential MVP candidate and an all-star. I think we should also talk about Dashy as well. Want to give him His Flowers having a good season by his standards. Again, a 108 in hard point, 122 in search, and a 0.99 in control. And actually, he's got 40 first bloods this season, which I think is really good for an AR when it comes to search and destroy. So I think for Bruce, look, it's been a little bit of a journey this season. It looked like he didn't have a future on OpTic for about 2.5 weeks, and then Scump retired, and that all got reversed. So now he's sort of back in the picture, very much, I think, a part of the inner workings or the inner circle of this team. And I think you can make a case that he's up there in the all-star argument for ARs alongside his duo Celium. So great season so far from both those players. Obviously want to tip Dan Ghosty and what he's done. Slaying-wise, the numbers haven't been there. But when you listen to their comms and just kind of what he's doing on a glue guy potential, he's doing well. I think the player to really take a look at as we kind of just narrow down major 3 stats, because I don't really want to look at Kyler's stats contextually across all season because he's been on another team. But as far as the slaying numbers go, for OpTic, they've been pretty good. Control has been a big problem. Want to see him turn around that 0.93 number. But in regards to his impact in search, where he's always been solid in the game mode and hard point, he's definitely slaying. And I don't think anyone's ever sit there and said that Kyler can't shoot back. Just want to continue to see him develop as a player. And again, the ceiling with this team, as always, is decision making. We've seen it time and time again. They find new and interesting ways to throw maps. So as long as they continue to make the right decisions as a team and commit, I think they're going to be good. But if we get back to sort of versions of these players where they were just sort of indecisive, going the wrong way, not picking up the pinch, not filling lanes correctly, giving lanes up and not calling out, then they may get in trouble against some of the other teams like Toronto and FaZe and LA Thieves that are a little bit more disciplined. Although I will say, to the FaZe standpoint, if we just want to make a last point here, OpTic's had their number pretty much all season. So I want to tip OpTic on that. They've actually been destroying FaZe the last year and a half. So when we talk about CDL being a game of matchups, these guys have definitely had one over the FaZe guys. So that's OpTic. I think they're in a much better spot they were a month ago, but the job is not done. They still have things to work on. They have 2 more events coming up. We'll see if Major 4 is a strong event, but I expect them to be good at Toronto and kind of into the final part of the season. So they're going to be a factor for sure for the rest of the year. But now I get to a team that I'm not really sure about, and that's the New York Subliners. We can take a look at the tournament results, but they've been on a little bit of a downswing recently after winning Major 1. You know, we've talked a lot about how this team had a tumultuous season last year. They cleaned house essentially, brought in Skies, brought in Priesta, and it apexed pretty early with them winning Major 1 and looking like the best team in the game. But since then, they've been kind of average. Online, they've had a bunch of interesting losses, getting 3-0 to 3. And the last 2 LAN events have been really tough. Now, I know for Major 2, they had the travel issues, but they didn't have that excuse in Major 3. And I thought losing to Florida in losers round 1 was a massive upset, and something that really surprised me with this team. And look, like, we take a look at their win records in stage 1, and they were dominant across all 3 game modes, right? 12-8 in hardpoint. They look like the best hardpoint team in the game. 9-6 in search. They had a couple bread and butters, and they looked like one of the better control teams as well. But if we keep scrolling through here, stage 2, again, they were great at hardpoint, but the search fell off and the control was mixed. And they said, okay, well, after stage 2, we're going to really work on our S&D. And they look good at the start, going 2-0 in search, but they've fallen back to 500. Control around 500 as well, and the hard point has fallen off a cliff. So right now, there's not really a strong game mode for New York, and you've really seen it with the results. If we scroll down here to the Major 3 qualifiers, had a nice NYSL win versus Rocker, but take a look at the map results since then. They 3-0'd Florida, got 3-0'd by Toronto, 3-0'd OpTic, got 3-0'd by Seattle, and then at the Major, they won 1 map, a close one, out to hardpoint against the eventual tournament winners, Toronto. And then they were only able to take a control against a Florida team that they should be way better in. And by the way, like, the S&D wasn't close. Florida absolutely destroyed them on a Fortress S&D. So I don't really know what to think of this for New York right now. They seem to really be struggling. I've asked people around the league about how scrims have been going this week for New York, because they're kind of the team I'm sort of got my eyes on this split, because they're sort of in a crossroads, and I've heard it's been mixed. I think they're struggling to kind of find their identity again. And we've seen this with teams from in the past that have peaked really early, and then for whatever reason, teams catch up and they just kind of don't find their ability to innovate. Teams have gotten past this issue before. I think FaZe is a really good example of a team over the years that always can have a strong start to the season, and they figure out how to sustain that most of the parts of the year, even when people catch up and figure out what they're doing. I think that's the position that New York is in. I think people have watched their tape, kind of stolen a lot of what they do. And New York really hasn't innovated on that front. I think that being said, if they can regain their form in Hardpoint, they've got a pretty tricky map pool for people to sort of navigate between these 4 maps. I think Fortress Hardpoint they're not bad at, but I wouldn't play it. They've been at times unplayable on Hotel Hardpoint. Their HYDRA is very good. Their Embassy is really good. HYDRA goes off on that map a lot. And they're pretty serviceable at Mercado. So when they're on, their Hardpoint map is good. I think this S&D record now it's kind of fallen into a spot where they don't really have sort of a bread and butter search. That being said, on Control, they've got this gaudy 8-1 record on Fortress Control, which I'm a little worried about if that map is now out of the pool. They're going to need to get good at Expo because they're 1-5 on a CDL. So a lot of opportunities there on the map pool for them to get back in form. So taking a look at the overall numbers this season, I mean, I think the thing that stands out so far for me is HYDRA's numbers. Having another MVP type season for one of the best players in the game. Definitely, again, in that conversation, definitely likely going to be an all-star this year between the all-star team 1 or 2. I think it really depends on that sub battle because it's really close between. I think one of the 3 between HYDRA, Pred, and Abizi is not going to get first team, which is really disappointing, but that's how it goes. HYDRA's been good across all 3 game modes. And I think in general, the slang has been really good for them. If we take a look at the overall numbers, surprisingly, Priest, who's normally been a very good search player, having a .83 in S&D is a little bit odd. And I think what's even more perplexing with this team and why I think they're so day-to-day is the big picture numbers, right? Let's take Major 1 out of the equation, stage 1 of the equation, everything since they've won the event. It's not like they haven't been slaying well. I mean, Kid's got a .93 in a hard point, which is okay. I mean, he's getting a lot of engagements, Token Hill time, not too worried about that. Everybody else seems to be shooting their gun pretty well, and their hard point record's been not too bad, 3-11. The S&D has been a real struggle for this team, and I think that's the area opportunity. Again, HYDRA's in one really frying, but you know, normally when we talk about players like Pred and Abizi, their first blood numbers are very high. I'm surprised that through the last 2 stages that HYDRA's first blood numbers are pretty low. And it almost seems like Kiz and him are kind of the 2 players looking to kind of make openers, and Kiz is really kind of struggling and looking at the first death. So want to see how they can sort of empower both of them to maybe work off each other a little bit better, or be able to give them some more tools so they can find first bloods easier in the rounds. Because their first blood rate, by the way, is 45%, which is not good. So I think, look, in summary for New York, it's definitely one of the more perplexing teams in the league. They've achieved their early season goals. They won the first event. But now you're like, okay, we've got a new goal, which is we need to stem the bleeding here. We're sliding. We're in 4th now. We were looking like a top 2 seed after event 1. It's not looking that good right now. What can we do to get ourselves back into the conversation? Because I think if you ranked a lot of teams in the CDL right now, they're probably like 7th or 8th. And the number of the quality teams are in front of them. So they need to go back, find their dominant respawn form, improve and search so they can catch up to some of the other good squads. And then I think this New York team will have opportunities going forward. Their schedule is not too bad for the qualifiers coming up. London, Boston, FaZe, Rocker, OpTic is pretty solid. I think they've got 2-3 wins in there. And then Vegas, Thieves, Gorillas, Surge, and Boston. So I think for New York, I feel good again about them qualifying for champs. I don't think that's an issue. It's just going to be down to the land performances because they haven't made it to the weekend the last 2 events. And that's something that needs to be improved and improved ASAP. And lucky for them, the next event's in Columbus. And we know what happened the last time New York was in Columbus. They won. So I think the sky could be looking up for New York, but they're in a crucial period now. A 3rd event where they slide is going to have major questions about this team, but if they can rebound, I think they're a contender once again. Just to close out the video, I realized I didn't talk about OpTic schedule, so just to go back for a second, my bad on that. OpTic's got a pretty, I would say, interesting schedule the next couple of qualifiers. LAG, Boston, London, New York, and Thieves coming up. New York's day-to-day. LA Thieves kind of mid-online. London will always be a tough battle against OpTic. They played some good series so far this season. Boston is going to be a tough one, and LAG is winnable. So I see 3 wins in there. And then coming into the stretch run, Vegas, FaZe, Seattle, Ultra, and Florida. There's at least 2 or 3 in there. So I feel good about OpTic's schedule and sort of being able to make winners bracket the rest of the 2 events. So apologies for missing that earlier in the video. So yeah, that's things. I think really 2 teams heading in opposite directions. OpTic is sort of looking to build on his top 2 performance and parlay that into, you know, more Sunday appearances, at least another event win before champs. And for New York, they've now been 2 events where they haven't made it to the weekend and they cannot make it a 3rd. They need to play well at Columbus or this team might be in a tricky spot, which is we know we're going to make champs. We haven't been good on land. Do we make a roster change going into the last event of the season? Let me know in the comments what you guys thought of the video. Like if you enjoyed it. We're going to have more team reviews coming up over the next few days. We're going to be doing our breaking point team video as well next week. So be on the lookout for that and get our predictions in before matches start on Friday next week. So subscribe for more, and we'll see you guys on the next video.